What is going on, everyone? My name is Andy. Welcome back to another FPL video. In this one, we're talking about which teams have the best upcoming fixtures from game weeks 9 to 14, and then discussing whether we should be considering any players from those teams. So if you enjoyed this video and you find it useful, make sure to give it a like, hit that subscribe button if you are new around here as well. And we're going to start off with Leicester, who, to be fair, have not had a great start to the season, conceded a lot of goals, lost a lot of games, but of course, they're in this video, so they've got good upcoming fixtures. Forest at home, Bournemouth away, Palace and Leeds at home in 11 and 12, and then Wolves away. And no matter what you think about Leicester, they are a team that tend to find a way to score. I think the Man United game is the only game they haven't scored in so far this season. And if we look at expected goals conceded, I know a lot of people like to look at actual goals conceded, but expected goals conceded tends to be a little bit of a better predictor about what might happen in the future. Nottingham Forest, Bournemouth and Palace, their next three games, all teams that are in the bottom 5 so far this season for expected goals conceded. Now, interestingly, Palace is a defence that I think is actually pretty good. Guaita is a player that I'm going to look at on my wild card. But they are in the bottom 5, and they have had difficult fixtures. But when you couple that with Leicester, who are a team that always seem to find a way to score, I think the next 4 look pretty good for an attacker. Maddison is definitely the #1 choice. A lot of people are going to put him in their team this week. 7.9 million, a pretty decent price. Despite the fact that Leicester have had some pretty tricky fixtures, he's still had 4 returns so far this season. So 3 goals, 1 assist. His expected goal involvement is way down on last year. 0.25 is not great at all. But I would kind of bank on him doing better with the fixtures they've got here. So he is the one to go for. I think when you look at other options, it's not just about whether they are a good option. It's all about who you have to drop in the process. So if you're starting to look at a punt on like Vardy or Iheanacho and Daka, I just don't think any of their minutes are safe enough. You know, Daka may have started the last 1 or 2 games, but if Iheanacho and Vardy start the next one, would that be surprising? Not really. And then you've got to drop one of Haaland or Mitrovic or Tony or Isak. And when you start reading out those names, I just don't see how we can go for a Leicester forward that is not guaranteed to play every single week, even with these great fixtures. So I would just pretty much discount them. The only other attacker I would look at is Harvey Barnes at 6.9 million. I think that's a pretty nice price. Again, you've got that same conversation that if you put Barnes in, which midfielder are you not selecting? So for example, on Game Week 9 wildcard yesterday, I put a video out that had Salah, Zaha, Maddison, Bowen and Martinelli as well. Now some of you might say Bowen is droppable, fair enough, so you could put Barnes in instead. But then I'm playing a 5-man midfield, and it means I'm not having one of the attackers. So is that worth having Barnes in for? The one punt I could see is putting Barnes in as a double up with Maddison and dropping Martinelli for the next 4 fixtures. He's got 2 tricky ones. He's got a blank as well in game week 12. I don't like the fact I would lose all that value on him. That is something to consider. I've got the same conversation going on in my head with Haaland as well. But that's the only way I could see Barnes fitting in. I think Maddison's the one. The forwards we just can't go with. With the defenders, look, it's pretty hard to convince you to go for any Leicester defenders. I'm not sitting there trying to convince you. I'm just trying to, I guess, bring up both sides of the argument. They have been poor. I think on paper, probably Arsenal, Chelsea, Man United and Spurs, they're all games that they weren't expected to win. I think even Brighton away was tough, especially the way that Graham Potter had them set up so far this season. And again, not excusing the amount of goals they've conceded, but I think a lot of their first 7 games, they were probably expected to lose anyway. The Southampton result, not great. Brentford was a weird one because they were in control of a lot of that game, and they just kind of gave it up towards the end and conceded 2. So I think they haven't had a chance to like properly prove themselves so far this year with a really good run of fixtures. But defensively, they've conceded something like 21, 22 goals in 7 games. It's hard to kind of, you know, go for one of their defenders, even if you look at the numbers so far. So non-penalty expected goals conceded per 90 minutes. They're not even in the top 5, interestingly enough, at 1.44. And when you take off the per 90 numbers, they've got 10.1 total expected goals conceded non-penalty, but they've conceded like 21, 22 goals, which is crazy. They've conceded a lot more than they were expected to. Now, you could put that down to possibly them being a little bit unlucky, or you could put it down to the fact that Ward just has not been good at all. And I think pressure is mounting on that pick. And it's not just the fact that he hasn't saved some of those shots. He just doesn't look in control in some of those games. We saw him arguing, I think it was with Ndidi the other day, over like a really bad touch he made with his feet. I just think when you're conceding that many goals and then you're making all those mistakes, the pressure just mounts every single game. And I just worry if he's kept in whether, Leicester will keep a clean sheet at any point. So, at any point, even over this pretty good run. So Everson might come in at some point, and you could, if you're a wild card, and go for Everson instead of Ward and just hope that he gets the number 1 shirt. But there's no guarantee that will happen. And look, if you're going for like Guaita, you might want to play Ward this week. So I think you've probably still got to go for Ward as your backup keeper if you're not going for both Leicester goalkeepers. And if you really want a defender, because in Game Week 11, Newcastle got some tricky fixtures. Some of you will have multiple Newcastle defenders. In Game Week 12, there's a blank for City and Arsenal. Leicester got Leeds at home. Not necessarily an easy clean sheet there, but it is a fixture you could play one of your defenders in. So I wouldn't completely write them off, but I definitely wouldn't want to play them every week. Justin started every game. 4.3 million is a nice price. I think if you want guaranteed minutes, then Evans is the one at 4.4. But I don't see Justin losing his place right now, given the options they've got. So if you really want a defender, he's probably the one that I would go for. Evans, if you really want that safety, for 4.4. But I think it's the attackers we've got to look at. Maddison is a standout. Maybe there's a place for Barnes in some of our teams. So let's discuss Chelsea, right? And I think a few of us, myself included, have been talking about this fixture run from Game Week 9 onwards as a good time to jump on Chelsea, possibly going for 2 defenders, maybe an attacker as well. Let's talk about the defenders first of all. When you put these fixtures on paper, I don't know how ideal it is to have them going away from home and playing so often. So in the next 6 fixtures, they play away from home 4 times. Palace, Villa, Brentford and Brighton. Now, we don't really care whether they're going to go and win those matches. If we're buying their defenders, we just want clean sheets. And I'm just not sure how many clean sheets there are over the next 6. Now, I'm more than willing to have Reece James in my side. For 6 million, I still think that's a bit of a bargain. 0.35 expected goal involvement. Very good for a defender. And by the way, that is more than some of the players we just looked at, like Maddison and Barnes. So when you couple that with clean sheet potential, Reece James looks great. So we definitely have him in there. And I think under Potter, they will get better defensively, but that could also take time. So the question is, do we double up? And I'm just not sure we do. A lot of people are going to be looking at keeping Cancelo, possibly having Trippier. Some of us are going to be looking at having Trent Alexander-Arnold. And then we're going to need to shave money off the team to get the attackers in that we want. So the one Chelsea defender that everyone has earmarked is Fofana, but then you look at that first Chelsea lineup under Potter, it was Sterling at left wing back. I know it wasn't really a traditional left wing back role, but that's where he lined up. Cucurella was left centre back, then Silva, then Azpilicueta. Now, I don't expect Azpilicueta to start lots of games, but you've got Koulibaly there, you've also got Fofana there. So is Fofana going to start every single game? I'm a little bit sceptical about that. And so even for 4.4 million, I don't know how happy I am about having him in my squad. The only thing I would say is I think centre-backs are a little bit more immune from coming on after 60 minutes, right? So sometimes if you've got an attacker, they don't start, you want them to come on because they can get something. Whereas with Fofana, I think if you play him in your FPL team and then he doesn't start for Chelsea, I think there's a lot less chance of him then coming on. So you could use one of your bench options instead. But I think for 4.4 million, he is one of your bench options. So if you need to use him and then he doesn't start, that is not ideal. So I think the players around his price point are probably worse for kind of returns when they're all on the pitch together, but they are going to get more minutes, the likes of Zuma, Justin, etc. Maybe even Ben Mee for Brentford, for example. So I don't know if we can go for Fofana, and I don't know if I want to pay 5.2 million for Cucurella. And again, I come back to the fixtures, and I think they might actually be better from an attacking point of view than a defensive point of view. So if you're going to go for a double up, I feel like Cucurella might, and this could be famous last words, might be the safest pick because Graham Potter used him a lot in that left centre-back role for Brighton. He knows how to play in that position. He knows what Graham Potter wants from him. So he might be the one that actually gets the most minutes going forward. Possibly Silva as well, but he's a little bit more expensive. So if you're going to go for the double-up, it probably has to be Cucurella. I think I've put Mendy on there, but again, Kepa started the last game. Mendy was injured. We don't really know which goalkeeper Potter's going to have as his number one. You would assume it's Mendy, but if you've got any doubts about that, or of course if he's not back fit, I just don't think you can go there. I don't think it's worth the risk. I would probably just go for James and leave it at that. Attacking point of view, Aubameyang at 9 million could be decent. I'm going to assume his minutes are going to be pretty good. But again, you put him in, you've got to take out one of those other really good forward options. You've also got to find money from somewhere to do it. If I was going to go for a Chelsea attacker, I think I'd go for Sterling. I'd be very surprised if he missed many minutes. And even in that left wing-back role, he was still very attacking in that Champions League game. And it might be that Graham Potter shifts the formation around a little bit and gives him even more license to attack as well. So I think if you're going to go for someone, it's Sterling. But 10 million is just so much money to try and fit him into your team. I've been saying this all season, he's just at that awkward price point where you've got to make a compromise somewhere else that you don't probably really want to do. So let's say you've got Cancelo and Trippier and James, and you've got Zaha and Maddison and whoever else in midfield, you've got all those players up front. If you've got an £8 million midfield spot, and you want that to be Sterling instead, where are you getting 2 million from? That's a lot of money to get out of your team, and that's what I worry about. I don't worry about what his output will be, his goals and assists, his expected goal involvement's very good. He's a quality player, he's going to get returns. Is he going to get enough to warrant that extra outlay? I'm not so sure about that. But for those of you on Wildcard 9, if you wanted to take a punt, Sterling is probably one of the players that I would look at. You could possibly go, if you're not interested in Salah, Son, De Bruyne, etc., you could go Haaland and Sterling and then use that extra money to kind of bulk up the rest of your squad. But I don't know if you can fit in Haaland plus another premium and Sterling as well. That's where it gets a little bit tricky. But I think he will do well over these fixtures. But like I said, defensive double up, I'm just not so sure. Let me know in the comments below what you think. All right, let's talk about Crystal Palace, who, to be fair, don't have a great fixture this week with Chelsea at home. But from Game Week 10 all the way up until Game Week 16, the fixtures are pretty great. So if you're in any doubts about getting Zaha, I probably wouldn't be. At 7.2 million, he definitely has the potential to match those players that are 8 million. I know a lot of us have had Zaha in our teams in the past. We're a little bit traumatized because it always feels like we get him in and he just doesn't get returns. But everything points to him being a really good option right now with those fixtures. His expected goal involvement is 0.59. Now, those numbers are up from last year. It doesn't mean they will remain that way. Just like Maddison's are down, they could come back up. But that is promising, right? And with the fixtures they've got, he looks like a great option at 7.2. Nailed on, 80 to 90 minutes most games and penalties. He's probably a lock for my wild card, I would say. If you look elsewhere, defensively, you've got a few options. So Anderson, Gay, a little bit cheaper there. I think Anderson might be slightly the better option, but I wouldn't worry too much. If you need to save the money, you could just get Gay for 4.4. He might also drop to 4.3 at some point soon. And then Guaita as well. Now, as I said with when I was talking about Leicester, Palace are in the bottom 5 for expected goals conceded so far this season. Now, if you look at the same numbers for last year, they were brilliant. Where they actually are is probably somewhere in between. I don't expect them to be in the bottom 5 come the end of the season. They're probably not going to be in the top 5 either, but I think the fixtures they've got, it's worth looking at their defensive options. Now, if you're buying a defender, it's going to depend on the fixtures that you need to play them in, right? So Game Week 12, for example, is a week that a lot of people are going to need their bench because of Arsenal players and Man City players not starting. Wolves at home seems like a pretty good fixture to have those players. Would I want to play them in Leeds and Leicester away and Everton away? Possibly not, but as a rotation option, I would definitely look at them. And for those of you on wildcard, Guaita is a really nice option at 4.5. I have seen some people worry that at some point he could just get benched for Johnston or someone else in that team, just randomly. It happened a few times last season. From what I can tell, he was having like small injuries, like finger injuries and stuff like that, which is why he missed some of the games. So I don't know if we should be massively concerned at that. And 4.5 means he's now 0.7 million cheaper than Pope. And with the fixtures, that extra value elsewhere in your team might be worth it. Like, I think Nick Pope is a really good goalkeeper option for FPL. And those people that got him kind of Game Week 7 and 8, look, absolutely laughing. There's no reason to try and get rid of him. But for those of us that are maybe building wildcard teams right now, I think 4.5 million could be a really good option to then let us spend money elsewhere. If you're looking to get kind of Salah and Trent Alexander-Arnold back some point, doesn't have to be this week, it could be Game Week 12 onwards, that is an extra bit of money for any of the players you own instead, right? Because they are the most expensive players in their position. And so having that extra 0.7 from Guaita could be pretty decent. The only other attacker, I don't think you can go for any of their forwards. I just think, again, you've got that problem that you have to drop one of the really good ones. But you could look at Eze if you wanted someone cheap. 5.5 million. I think he started every single game so far this year. Expected goal involvement's not great, and he is one of those players that's more likely to get you an assist than a goal. But at 5.5 million, I don't know if there's too many other better options. There's some players around 6, 6.5, Martinelli, Sinistera that we talked about, maybe Harvey Barnes, all the way up at 6.9, but they're quite expensive. Some people have looked at Gordon as well, for example, at Everton, but Eze could be a nice little differential there. So as always, it's going to depend on how your squad squad is built, and I'm not really picturing myself having a 5.5 million midfielder in my team for my wild card. But if you're someone that wants to upgrade a position elsewhere right now, and you've got like a £7 million midfielder or someone like that there, you could look to downgrade to Eze. But Zaha is definitely the standout here. I don't mind the defensive options, but if you're not going for Guaita, I think you've got to look and pick and choose when you might need to play them, because there's some fixtures in there like Leicester away I don't think are ideal, but Wolves at home is pretty good. So I think Fulham is pretty easy, right? They've got a decent fixture, and therefore you should be looking at Alexander Mitrovic and probably not too many other players from that team. Andreas Pereira is still a very good midfield option at 4.6 million to have sat on your bench, but I assume at this point most people have got him. The only interesting thing with Mitrovic, he's now 6.9 million, so he's getting very close to the price of like Isak and Tony as well, who have also risen a little bit from where they started, but not as much as Mitrovic. So at some point soon, it might actually be that if you've got like Haaland and Jesus or something like that, or Haaland and Isak, and you want a third player, I think people still view Mitrovic as if he's 6.5, but he's actually getting very close to the price of Tony, so they're a bit more comparable now. But when you look at how involved he is when Fulham score, I know obviously the last game they scored 3 and he wasn't involved at all, but that's not going to happen very often. 0.52 expected goal involvement is very good as well. We know that he's nailed 90 minutes penalties and all that stuff too, and the fixture run is just great, so we should definitely be looking at him. And Fulham have also impressed so far this year. I think a lot of people still had visions of when Scott Parker was in charge last time they were in the Premier League, but they scored a decent amount of goals. They've scored 1.57 goals per 90 minutes so far. They're kind of middle of the road. They're just a little bit ahead of Palace, Chelsea and Leicester in that regard from a non-penalty expected goal involvement point of view. So doing pretty well, and I think that could get even better with the fixtures they've got coming up. Whether or not you should go for a defender, I'm just not so sure. Again, you could look at the fixtures you have to play them in. So if you need a player for kind of game weeks 11, 12 and onwards, etc., and you're only playing them in particular fixtures, maybe you could look at Tosin or Tete. But again, they are a team that's in the bottom 5 for non-penalty expected goals conceded, and I'm not sure I expect that to change too much as the season goes on. I think they'll win matches, they'll score plenty of goals as well, but I do think they're a team that will continue to leak goals as well. So you could look at them like nailed on, good for those fixtures you might want them in 11 and 12. But I think there's probably better players around that price point. And again, Leno comes in at 4.5. If you get save points and stuff like that, he could be decent. But I don't see too many clean sheets. And Guaita for the same price just seems like a better option. So I think with Aston Villa, I'm probably going to be repeating myself a little bit when it comes to Watkins, because 7.2 million seems like an okay price. The fixtures look pretty good. Leeds, Forest and Fulham all in the next 4 game weeks. But then it comes back to that question. We've got all those forwards to choose from, only 3 spots. Am I really going to put Ollie Watkins as one of them? Probably not. And I think the fact that Leeds, Forest and Fulham are all away games kind of dents the appeal a little bit as well. So if I was going to go for an attacker, it would probably be a punt on Leon Bailey instead of having Andreas Pereira. So a lot of people are going to be looking at 3-4-3 formations with Andreas Pereira on the bench. Bailey is now only 0.1 million more expensive than him because he has dropped. He started the last 3 games. He's now started 5 of the first 7 that Aston Villa have had. He is, of course, a bit more of a minutes risk. I think he's one of those players that no matter how many team sheets I see with him in the starting 11, I'm always going to be worried for the next one. But as a bench player, if I have to play him ahead of Andreas Pereira and they both start, I would bet more money on Leon Bailey getting points than I would Andreas Pereira. I think Andreas Pereira is a perfectly good option for our bench, and if you've got no wildcard or anything like that, you shouldn't be looking to swap. But for anyone that has got a wildcard right now, that could be someone that you look at, because if you had to play him in game week 12, for example, for that blank that I've talked about a lot, Fulham away is a pretty good fixture. So Leon Bailey is a bit of a punt for 4.7, could be okay, but I wouldn't want to play him every single week. Then we're looking at the defensive options. Martinez at 4.9 million just feels way too expensive. For less money you can get Guaita, for a little bit more you can get Pope, so I think he's just kind of priced out. And then it just depends how much money you've got to spend. If you've got a little bit more, Luca Dean is more attacking than someone like Mings is, and I think again those fixtures are not necessarily ideal for clean sheets. There's just a few too many away games. Chelsea at home is not ideal, but if I had to play him in one of those fixtures rather than playing him every single week, it wouldn't really worry me too much. If you've got the money to spend, I would say Luca Dean. If not, I think you just save it and go for Mings at 4.3, depending on again which fixtures you need to play him in, because I wouldn't want to play an Aston Villa defender every single week. So I just wanted to talk about some of the other teams that don't necessarily have great fixture runs all the way from 9 to 14, but have got pretty good fixtures and players that we should be looking at. So I didn't want to miss out Bournemouth, so I could talk about Solanke again at 5.7 million as a forward option, nailed on. He should be anyway. I know they're going to have a new manager, so that might change, but I would expect him to start most games, probably play 80 to 90 minutes on penalties, a bit like Mitrovic, a bit like Tony and stuff like that, but he's only 5.7 million. And from game weeks 9 to 13, the fixtures look pretty good. He's kind of a set and forget option to allow you to spend money elsewhere. I don't think there's anyone else I would consider for Bournemouth. I know people are worried about Bowen, but if I had higher priority transfers to make, or if I wanted to roll the transfer this week, I would not worry about having to give him Wolves at home, Fulham at home, Southampton away. I don't expect him to get anywhere near the amount of kind of output in terms of goals and assists that he did last season. We spoke in pre-season, I think his expected assist was 5 last year, and he got 17 fantasy assists. That's pretty crazy. He was never going to be able to keep that up, but he's still a quality player. I know they've got a lot of European games as well, but I think he can get points over the next 3. Whether or not you should bring him in right now, different story, but if you've got him, I wouldn't worry. And if you want a defender, we've seen that Emerson is just not nailed, so you're over looking at Fabianski in goal, or possibly going for Zuma at 4.5 million as a nailed on option. Originally, when I looked at Isak for Newcastle from game week 8, I thought, okay, game week 8 to 10 looks pretty good, but after that it's tricky. But looking at it again, Everton at home and Villa at home, perfectly good fixtures, I think, for Newcastle. Man United away, I could see them getting a goal as well. If you look at expected goals per 90 minutes so far this season, non-penalty, Newcastle are in the top 5. It's Man City, as you'd expect, then Arsenal, then Liverpool, then Spurs, then Newcastle. They've done very well in generating good quality chances. So I think Isak could be decent, even if you're having to buy him right now, if you didn't want to go for Tony. The only question mark is, what happens when Wilson comes back in? Does he take penalties back? Probably. Does he take that number 9 spot back? Probably. I still expect Isak to play, but will his output be as good? That's the only slight question mark I've got with him. So Maximin just can't stay fit, so I'm not interested there. And we know that Trippier and Pope are really good options. I think if you want another Newcastle defender, it's probably got to be Shah at 4.7 million. Everton, Idrissa Gueye now there, Anana playing well, Cody and Tarkowski doing well, the back four looking pretty decent, Pickford back when he obviously when he's fit again. Patterson for 4.1 million could be the cheap defender of choice to go for. I know game weeks 10 and 11, Man United and Spurs are not great, but the fixtures either side of those are pretty good. And for someone so cheap that maybe you have to get off the bench or play when one of your players blanks, not that bad of an option at all. I don't think there's anyone else I'd really look at in that side right now, as well as they might be playing. I just think he's probably one of the only options for our FPL squads. And then, of course, with Brentford, you've got Tony. Maybe, again, depending on what fixtures you need to play them in, you could look at someone like Ben Mee, game week 11 against Brighton at home. If you wanted to play him instead of playing one of your Newcastle defenders against Man United away, that could be an option. Wolves at home in game week 14 looks pretty good. So you could look at someone like that, but ultimately it's probably Tony. Pretty good fixtures. But I'm looking at them now and I'm wondering whether Newcastle's might be slightly better. They're probably very similar. So I think it just depends. In that case, you probably go for Tony over Isak because you know what you're getting. When Wilson comes back, Isak might be not an issue, but might not be quite as good. So I think you probably do go for Tony looking at those fixtures. So plenty of players to consider, especially if you're on a wild card. Let me know down below, who are you looking to bring in? Any of these players that I've talked about or teams that you just wouldn't target at all, you think I've got it completely wrong, please do let me know in the comments below. Give the video a like if you enjoyed it. Hit that subscribe button if you're new around here, and I'll catch you again soon.